This is a story about basic underwater demolition SEAL training and deals with one particular problem that happened in Hell Week. The title of the story, Night Problems. I think it would be safe to say that for every man who completed BUD/S, there is one night problem which stands out from all others and comes to mind when the words night problems are spoken. For me, that particular event occurred on the third night of Hell Week. We were to enter the ocean just behind the team compound and paddle our inflatable boat Small 1 mile to a rock jetty that extended out into the ocean. This jetty consisted of huge boulders, roughly the size of automobiles, and protruded 50 to 75 yards into the ocean from a beach near the Coronado Hotel. Once we had reached our objective, we were to remain in the water between 400 and 500 yards off of the appointed beach and wait for the BUD/S instructors to signal us to come ashore. We would then paddle our boat to the rocks, climb out of the boat and portage, or carry the boat across the rocks to the beach. We had successfully completed the rock portage on several previous occasions, but each of those portages had been conducted during the day in relatively light surf, and even then it was a difficult process. When a boat crew reaches the rocks, it is imperative that each member of the boat crew exit the IBS on the ocean side of the boat. At this point, the boat and paddles must be moved up onto the rocks out of the surf zone as quickly as possible. If a trainee should happen to get caught between the boat and the rocks, the force of the boat, driven by incoming waves, would crush him. Therefore, even in small surf, a rock portage is no simple matter. It was 1900 hours or 7 in the evening when we entered the water to start the operation. It was cold and the surf was booming. And when I say booming, I am not referring to waves that are 6 to 8 feet high. I mean more in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 feet. Huge waves that you know can cause serious damage and pain if you screw up. The night was overcast, cloudy, and therefore very dark. You could hear the waves as they crashed on the beach, but it was too dark to see them clearly. You knew they were huge from the roar they made, a clear indication we were in for a rough ride. As we waded into the water, I heard Larry Miller, a member of my boat crew, shout, "Look out!" A boat crew that had entered the water a few seconds before us had been lifted about 15 feet into the air by one of these huge waves, turned upside down, and the men and boat then slammed onto the beach with such force that it broke one of the trainees' paddles. I could hear another trainee sucking for air. He was making that distinct sound one makes when his wind has been knocked out. Luckily, that was all that happened. They picked themselves up, gathered their composure, and started back in the water to try once again to make it past the surf zone. Each boat crew would be dumped at least once by these huge waves, others several times, and for a while it seemed that we might spend the entire night just trying to clear the surf zone. Eventually, as our IBS slid over the final swell and the boat crew settled into the routine of paddling toward the objective, I began thinking about the rock portage that awaited us. If it had been difficult to successfully complete the portage during the day when the surf was small, what would it be like at night when the surf was booming? Time moved quickly, and before I knew it, we were offshore near the rocks, gathering with the other boat crews, awaiting the signal from our instructors to come ashore and start the rock portage. It had been prearranged that the instructors would wave a white lantern as a signal for us to start paddling to the rocks and conduct the portage. For now, all of the boat crews huddled together, and the trainees just looked at each other, eyes wide and terror-stricken. Just thinking about making a portage in this killer surf was enough to turn your blood cold. The swells under our boat were huge and served further warning of what was to come. From our vantage point, we could see white water jetting into the air as the surf pounded the jetty. The noise caused by the waves breaking onto the rocks was deafening and only led to further uncertainty. We sat there in silence for what seemed an eternity. Then finally, there appeared a white light moving back and forth on the rocks. Red would have been our signal that the operation had been canceled. White meant it was a go. God help us. It really wasn't red. It was white, and that meant the portage was on. We looked at each other in disbelief. Some of the men were saying it was too dangerous and were questioning whether we shouldn't all turn around and go back to the staging area where we started. I heard another trainee say he didn't want to risk death by being bashed against the rocks, and others agreed. By now, all the boat crews were talking amongst themselves, trying to figure out what would be the best thing to do. Everyone, that is, except Mike Paul, the officer in charge of our boat crew. "Hell yes," he shouted, and then, "Hoo-yah!" And before I knew what had happened, we were paddling like crazy. The men from the other boat crews looked on in astonishment as we headed toward the rock jetty. We paddled feverishly. The other boat crews sat there in total disbelief, and we tried to remain focused. Soon we could see the huge waves pounding the rocks. It was as if Mother Nature was showing what she had in store for us. As we drew closer, I could more clearly see the light on the rocks and drew confidence from the fact that our instructors always knew what was best for us and wouldn't expose us to a situation we wouldn't be able to handle. The two previous occasions that we had attempted a rock portage, during the day, the surf deposited our boat at the base of the rocks, and we jumped out, climbed the rocks, pushing and pulling our IBS, hoping the waves that followed would help by further pushing our boat along and thus helping us lift it onto the rocks. Not this time. As we came closer to the rock jetty, what must have been the wave of all waves caught our boat, lifting it high into the air and pushing us forward faster and faster. Then, before I knew what had happened, the wave broke, and we were deposited right on top of the rocks, not below or beside the rocks, as had been the case during our previous portage. We just looked at each other in total disbelief, then quickly jumped out of our IBS, spilled what water was inside, and then moved quickly across the rocks and to the beach before the next wave arrived. On the beach, some very anxious instructors greeted us. They had called the exercise off because of the huge surf. None of the other boat crews had attempted the portage, only ours. Apparently, after we had started paddling to the rocks, the instructors had hoisted the red lantern. We had been so busily paddling that we hadn't noticed. In reality, there was no way for us to have known, because the instructors were waving the lantern from beside the rocks, not on them. But what about the white light that had signaled us to come ashore? We were then told that the light had come from a flashlight used by a civilian looking for crabs. It hadn't been one of the signal to come ashore from one of our instructors. As I looked back at the rock jetty and the man who was still out there looking for crabs, I thought about what could have happened. It could have been fatal. For a short while, our boat crew was heralded by the instructors for willingly undertaking what we felt we had been directed to do, while the other boat crews had hesitated. In reality, the other trainees had made the right decision. Had they followed our lead and all paddled to the rock jetty, men could have been severely injured, even killed. This night operation had ended in our favor. We had succeeded, but we had also been very, very lucky. If you like this story and would like to purchase a copy of my book, go to www.udt-seal-stories.com and I will send you a signed copy. If you prefer the Kindle version, go to amazon.com, type in Nick Nicholson. Thank you.